Right, so welcome back everybody to our continuing series of educating people about Jamaican law and US immigration. I'm Nadine Atkinson and with me is my esteemed colleague and friend Courtney Foster, attorney in Jamaica, and welcome to you out there in internet land. We're going to talk a little bit today about US immigration, focusing a little bit on what's been in the news, which is the whole issue of adjustment of status. Can you adjust here in the States? You have to go back to some foreign country to get your green card. So that's pretty much the basis of the conversation this evening. So over to you, Courts.
All right, so I think that's quite a number of persons are not understanding the legal ramifications for the new rules, especially in the US. So I've had a number of persons approach me, but of course I don't practice immigration law in the US, but the aspect that I tend to deal with in Jamaica is, for example, where someone's father is not on the birth certificate, father's name is not on the birth certificate, or if you need a declaration of paternity, sometimes those documents are required for immigration purposes. But where I think we could start off is if you could indicate to us really what is the immediate change that exists as it relates to green card holders or persons who are in the process of applying for a green card.
It's really related to persons who are applying for a green card, because adjustment of status really means that you are going to get your green card here in the States. You are not going to be going to the embassy, for example, in Jamaica to speak with the immigrant visa officer and get your excuse me, get your green card through that particular process. So adjustment of status is a very specific set of rules that apply to persons who are here in the United States. There are some broad categories that persons may be aware of. So, for example, persons who might have come here as visitors or students, or they came on J1 visas or crewman visas and they overstayed, meaning the term of that non-immigrant visa that they had was you come to the States for X period of time and you go back to wherever it is you came from. And instead, at the end of your stay, you decided that, well, for whatever reason, you found love, you got married, you are going to stay in the United States and go through your green card process in that way. You also have another set of persons who are still in, we're going to say, status. They're not out of status. And they can adjust their status in the US, such as persons who have the H-1B visa and so on. The H-1B visa is for persons who are highly skilled. So if you are a nuclear physicist or you're an esteemed attorney in another country and so on, you can come here on a, excuse me, on an employment-based visa, which leads to a green card at the end of that process. So we're really looking at a system that has, I suppose, multi-tiered is the best way of putting it. The ones who are in true danger are those persons that have come and have fallen out of status and are now seeking to adjust themselves, as the terms say, here in the United States. So those persons, and that's why I mentioned the category of persons who, for example, came here on visitors' visas and did not return home. What the government is saying now is you and you and you and you are going to have to return to your countries and do what is called consular processing. That's really just going to the embassy in your country or going to the consulate in your country. A little easier said than done, because if you are going to be leaving the US and you have fallen out of lawful status, you now run the risk of what is called having accrued unlawful presence, meaning you are here for 1 day legally because we allowed you to stay for 1 day. Day one is over, now we're at day two. You are now out of status. And each day you're out of status, you accrue unlawful presence. 1, 2, 3, all the way up to how many ever days, months, or years you are here. When you leave, that triggers a ban. Depending on how long you were here in the States, if you leave the US without getting permission, it's called a waiver. If you leave without getting that permission, you trigger that ban of either 1 year, 3 years, or maybe even 10 years. So if you left, you have to now surmount that hurdle of that particular ban, which I think is why a lot of persons became so anxious when the government announced, it was May 22, that for persons seeking to adjust, this would be what they would be expecting.
But there's I saw a news report that said that the policy has been dialed back a little bit. Can you just explain what was meant by that? Because that was the headline that was being circulated on social media.
So May 22nd, the government put out what they call a policy memo because they've been doing a lot of that because it's quicker to just send out that information about May 26th or May 27th, somewhere around there. They did put out a follow-up memo to say, oh, adjustment of status has always been a discretionary feature of US immigration, which means the USCIS officer that you're going to be sitting before has to look at all of the negatives as it relates to you and all of the positives as it relates to you, and to thereby make a decision using everything that is before him or her. That's what the new policy memo has said. However, the problem with that is, as with anything that relates to too much discretion, sometimes persons exercise their discretion in a manner that is not necessarily good for you, the person who's sitting before them. And if somebody has too much discretion, the law becomes too confused and muddled, because the way I will exercise my discretion is not the same way in which you will exercise your discretion, literally on the same issue. So I think they will probably be announcing something again based on some things I'm seeing in the media. They will most likely be announcing something new to offer a little more clarity on exactly what it is they're expecting to happen when persons complete their applications for adjustment of status, because people still are submitting their documents for adjustment of status. I think perhaps the thing to tell people is, if you were planning to submit, look at what the government has said and make your application even more robust, if you can possibly do that. That's I think the main takeaway for that now.
So what about those persons, for example, individuals who say that they are of a particular sexual orientation and they had to leave Jamaica and they can't go back home while this adjustment of status process is being exercised? What avenue would they have, if any?
They're in a sort of a different category because they would not be seeking adjustment of status in the same way as somebody who came here, for example, got married and overstayed. They would be seeking more along the lines of asylum, and their situation is also somewhat now more precarious, because the backlog for persons who are saying, oh, this is happening in my home country, or that is happening in my home country, and I cannot go back, is in the millions. And the government is making haste to deal with a lot of those cases. So if you came here in December for example, of 2025, you might well find out that you have a hearing or you have an interview in maybe a year because the government is moving very quickly on those cases where persons are saying, oh, I have a fear of persecution. That's what the law says. Excuse me. You have to have a fear of persecution in your country. For those persons, they are facing an even more uh, deliberate, I would say, and specific set of threats based on how the authorities are applying the law now. Those persons I am finding based on who are coming to me as it relates to whether it's sexual orientation or political persecution, these persons have to make sure that whatever they're filing, you have to do it within 1 year. And you also have to make sure you have a robust set of documents to prove what your case is. Because if you cannot convince either the immigration judge or the hearing officer, the USCIS officer, that you are someone deserving of asylum based on whether it's your sexual orientation, your political opinion in your country, you're going to find yourself in deportation, and you might well find yourself not necessarily in your country that you're saying you feared, but you might find yourself in a third country. So, for example, I'm from Jamaica. If I was going to be deported, God forbid, that is where I'd expect to go. But no, I can end up in some place in South America. I could possibly end up in a far-flung country in Africa, which has been happening to persons over and over again as they're going through the process seeking asylum. So I want probably to just say to persons that if you are making a bid for an asylum claim here in the States, you have to make sure that your asylum case is extremely strong. A lot of persons, when they leave home, truly the main problem that they have is economic issues. You're not employed, or you're underemployed, or you cannot get a job in your field, and then you seek to leave. The government is becoming more cognizant of that fact. And so when you come to the States and you seek asylum, they're also doing something else. They're preventing persons from getting a work permit now. The new rule that they wish to implement is if you're coming to seek asylum and you come and you seek asylum, you're not going to get a work permit. You're going to have to wait until that case is adjudicated before you get that work permit. So if you're here for 2 years and you can't work legally because you have no work permit, how are you going to survive? So the government is trying to clamp down, it says, on frivolous applications that persons have been making for asylum claims. So I'm recommending to people, as I always do, to think very long and hard and very carefully about the decisions that you make as it relates to coming here for longer than you are supposed to be here. I mean, let's put it like that.
I'm happy that you mentioned the work permit aspect, because there's a concern, especially with Jamaicans I've interacted with, where they're saying that they do not have the financial resources to hire a top-notch Atkinson flower. So is there any legal aid or any process available to persons who are financially strained as a result of them not being able to work in the US whilst they're seeking to pursue this process?
Well, there are lots of organizations that offer pro bono services, and there's some that offer low bono services. But like we say in Jamaica, water more than flour. You will find that there are a lot of persons that have the need for an attorney, but there are just so many organizations that offer services. The private attorneys such as myself, there are a lot of lawyers in private practice, but obviously, regardless of whether or not you're using an attorney who is in private practice or you're going with a non-profit or whatever entity it is, those organizations have to run. You need fuel in the tank to run. Everybody does need that. What I do suggest that persons do, and even today I saw an article as I was preparing for our talk this evening, where the government is indicating, and the Immigration Lawyers Association is indicating, that more and more lawyers' identity are being siphoned off, literally. Identity theft. Persons are posing as lawyers because persons are desperate. So you have those scammers out there who are preying on the fact that I am desperate to stay here in the States. I'm saying I don't have any money, or I don't actually have any money. And so they present themselves as either lawyers or persons who can help you to put your documentation in. And then they take your money and off they go. So persons need to be very cautious. Yes, you're saying, oh, this is too expensive. Why I should pay she for filing a paper. When I have no money, whatever it is you say, you have to think very carefully about the fact that a lawyer is someone who you should always be able to have access to, whether it is checking on their certification on the website. For example, we're both members of the Jamaican Bar, so the General Legal Counsel has our information. You can call up the General Legal Counsel and say, is there a Nadine Atkinson Flowers? Is there a Courtney Foster? Is there a John Brown? So we are held to a much higher standard as attorneys than other persons who will say they're going to help you. So whenever you're making a decision, don't just think, I don't have any money to do it, and I'm just going to pay a friend, or I'm going to pay whatever it is. Think about the fact that if you use a competent lawyer, you always have that assurance that the lawyer is utilizing their skills, their resources, and their experience to help you. Because that's what you need. You need somebody with the knowledge, the skill, the experience, the honesty, the integrity, and the ethical backing to help you with your case. So that's what I tell persons, that they need to make sure that they do when they're seeking legal advice. Because the advice you get on TikTok, I mean, I'm a lawyer, so I can discern between the advice that some persons who are not lawyers might give you and the advice that lawyers might give you. But you may not be able to discern it. And don't forget that every case is different. So when Courtney said, but I did so and so and so and I get through, if I do the same thing, I might not get through, as we say, because every case is different. And your friend not going to tell you that, so my father named the bird up on my birth paper, and Miss Foster had to do so and call RGD and put a paper into court, and here I am now. Because she figures you don't need to know that part. That part is her private business. And I go now with a similar situation. Father's name not on the birth certificate. It's submitted to the US government. And they say, but how you are applying for so and so based on your father name not on your birth certificate? Delay, more money, lost time, all of that. So it is actually very important to contact a lawyer when you have these cases. We do serve a useful purpose.
So that is in relation to persons who are already in the system and are being processed. What about the people now who want to start the process? Is now the best time to even embark on any immigration application, or we should wait to see how things develop regarding the various policies?
That's something that a lot of persons have been asking. And I am saying to persons that if there's a benefit available to you, in my humble estimation, there's no need to delay putting in your application. So for example, if you live in Jamaica or you live in Turkey or wherever it is you're joining us from, and you are married to a US citizen, or you have a US citizen mother, father, or sibling, or an employer in the US who wants to put your documentation in, whether it's for family-based green card or employment-based green card, or if you're a student, I don't see why you should not proceed to put that application in. The person that I want to give information, this particular bit of information I'm going to talk about now, is those persons who would be coming to the US on, they call it a single intent visa. So those visitors, those persons who are coming or here for school and so on, persons who are coming, and the law requires that when they have finished their stay, they return home. So you're coming to go visit Statue of Liberty, or you're coming for a wedding, or whatever it is you're coming for. When you come, my strong advice has always been, make sure you go back home, because the screws are tightening. They're implementing what has always been the law in a lot of cases, but it has become a little more discretionary. They're implementing it in a far more strict manner. And you run the danger of coming here and finding yourself locked up for weeks, for months, before you can go back to your home country. You have to spend that money that you were saying, I spend on a lawyer. You still end up having to spend it, because if you are picked up by ICE, Immigration Custom Enforcement, you are going to be detained. And you can't just walk out. You have to get a lawyer to put documents in court for you. And they detain you in some not so pleasant places, and they detain you in places far from your loved ones and friends and family. And when you finally decide, listen, stay aside, I'm gonna go back to my yard, it may well be that months have passed. So I say to persons, if it is you have a legal pathway to come to the US, such as the ways in which I've talked about, wonderful. But if you are in that group of persons who you say, as we say in Jamaica, may I take a chance? This is not take a chance time. Because I think everybody read the news, and certainly everybody on every social media, and see where they're detaining persons left, right, and center. They're even detaining persons who have
about the visitors visa.
Mm-hmm. You
so
said
the
about
visitor visa, it's supposed to be, as you say, I was saying for the visitors visa, as you said, is if you're going to a wedding or you want to visit a particular state, and you're there for pleasure, not for work. What I have seen, however, is that there are lots of persons, a lot of content creators or influencers who travel overseas, and they are engaged, meaning that they're in contracts to perform certain services. Wouldn't that be considered as somebody working on their visitor's visa, whether it is for an hour, you're doing a shoot with a particular company, or you're videotaping yourself to do some promotion online? Wouldn't that be considered working and therefore in breach of your visitor's visa?
That I'd not actually, it is, but I'd actually not thought of that context. I was more thinking of, persons come here as visitors, and you pick up something at Burger King, do a 2 weeks here, whatever, you work for somebody, whatever it is. But that is an excellent observation, because that is really work. And your visitor's visa, it doesn't say that on the paper, which is the visa paper in your passport, that you are not supposed to be working. You are here for fun and sights and sounds. But that is one of the crucial features of the B1/B2 visa. You are supposed to come for a specific period of time to do a specific thing. And usually I say to people, it is for you to see the sights and sounds of the country and to go back home. Because if you come here and, like Courtney says, you are filming content, you are doing photo shoots, whatever it is, once there is some element of reimbursement in there, or some element that
Yeah.
could be construed as working. Something as simple as house sitting can be considered as work. If you come here,
Yeah.
you have your friends and they have their house and they're going off to wherever and they say, Courts, come and spend the month here, man, and you get room and board and the fridge is full of food. That can be construed as work and you can lose your visitor's visa. You can get that visa canceled by immigration authorities when you're coming in, or worse yet, you leave coming back. They cancel that visa.
Oh,
Can be canceled right at the airport in Kingston or in Montego Bay. And as I say that, one of the things that they're doing is they're going through your phone. So they'll say, "Good evening, Mrs. Flowers. How are you? What you coming for?" And I say, "Oh, I'm going to New York for a wedding. My friend is getting married, blah, blah, blah. And I'm staying 2 months with her because she's my great friend. I haven't seen her in a long time." And they're talking to you and they say, "Oh, can we look at your phone?" Because remember, you'd have had to say on your documentation,
this was
putting your
by the
different
team.
social media. And they say, "Can you open the phone and we can look at it?" You don't have to let them look at your phone, but then remember, they don't have to let you come in. So you are figuring
Yeah.
everything is good. You give them the phone and they start scrolling and they start seeing the conversation between yourself and your friend saying, "When you come, we're going to go to do A, B, and C, and you're going to get paid $200. Or when you come, remember that you're doing that promotional video for Hot Girls Are Us or whatever it is." That all points to work. And that all points to contravention of the terms and conditions of your visitor's visa. And right there on the spot, they will stamp it and say cancel. Hopefully, they'll say cancel without prejudice and you can apply later. But they will cancel it and they will put it in their computer system that they canceled it because they are of the view that you're coming here to work. Or they might put that we found evidence that John Brown was coming to work. And sometimes clients have even told me they've sat there whilst they called other parties that
Oh,
they find in their phone and say, "Oh, Nadine, she's coming to talk to you," and the other person might say, "Yes, and you know that when she come, we're gonna do A, B, C, and D," and that's it. So persons have to be very cautious. You might be lucky that they just send you back on the next plane, but you might be unlucky
yeah.
that they paying you right there in the airport for a few days. So people have to be very careful.
No,
I have a question.
there was a. Oh, sure. Go ahead.
Is it safe for anyone to travel into and or outside of the United States at this time? Would you recommend it for anyone to do that? Especially now with this current regime that is living at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, the orange man.
If you well, we don't disparage here, but if it is that you are able to do so without putting yourself in danger. So if you're a green card holder, if you're a citizen, fine, go ahead and travel. Other persons, you travel at your own risk because you are required as a green card holder, and this is the weight of it. You're required as a green card holder to actually have your green card with you at all times. If you're a citizen, you don't have to. But certainly, if you are neither a citizen, a green card holder, or in some other lawful status, whether it's student, asylee, refugee, employment-based visa application, whatever, it's not a good thing. It's not a good time to do it. And I've heard people say, "Oh, but I won't fly. I'll take the bus." Long before this particular government came in, the government enforcement agencies were stopping buses and talking to people, asking to see their status. And now, in what I call a time of heightened scrutiny, unless we're not as diplomatic, time of heightened scrutiny, I would say to persons, if you are legally able to travel throughout the country or to leave the country and come back, fine, do so. But if you are in a more tenuous and precarious state, I would say you don't. You should not.
But what about visitors coming in, especially from Jamaica or countries in Africa, especially Black people? Is it
No,
safe for us?
remember, they there are certain countries that the government has said that they're not giving visas to.
Right,
And there's
but if you
certain
already have a visa,
you already have a visa. As long as your visa is legitimate, there's no reason that you shouldn't travel. What you have to contemplate now is what possible, what's the word I want? What possible drama can unfold when you come. But if you've got your visa in your hand, and in your hand meaning it's in your passport, you have no issues, in my view, in coming in. When you come in, for whatever reason, they may say, okay, they want to ask you questions. But if you have your visa as a visitor and you're coming for a legitimate purpose, and you can show very clearly that you're going to be returning home at the end of the 3 day, 1 week, 2 weeks, whatever, I don't see an issue. But always
okay.
I say be cautious. And I say that because just as I was explaining a little while ago about the whole thing of work, let's say I have a visitor's visa and Courtney is here in the States and I'm talking to her. And I'm like, boy, Courts, in 3 years when I'm finishing with my degree, I think I want to come up to the States there and do some work. Anybody I could link, because we're Jamaicans, we like to network and ask about links and such. And she'll say, yeah, man, I know this other lawyer. She will be able to maybe put you on to a job here or there. When I'm coming in with my visitor's visa now and they look through my phone, they might be of the view that, oh, it's not really 3 years from now I'm planning to come to get this job, but rather as soon as I land and leave the airport, I'm going to be going into that job. So people have to be very careful of the path that they're treading as they are making their preparations to come and when they do arrive.
Okay, you probably already spoke about this earlier. I just got in. But for someone coming from Jamaica who already has a visa and it's almost expired,
Mhm.
it's a two-parter. Is it safe to travel when it's close to expiration? And with the new restrictions where they're no longer giving out visas, I don't know how far they've gone into this decision, but have they just included people who already have had their visitors visas for years? They would not be able to renew their visas at this time.
I think we're talking about different things. It's not that they have decided that they're not giving out visas. They're for persons who are coming to the States, and Jamaica is on a list of about, I think it's 75 countries, that they have said they're pausing immigrant visas processing, meaning if it is you're coming here to live as a green card holder, they are looking very carefully or with additional care at those processes, but it's still actually continuing. As it relates to visitors' visas, the government has not said we're not going to be giving out new visitors' visas. What they have said in some instances are one, you're going to have to pay it's almost like a bond. And when you go back to your country, you get back that money. And it's kind of a hefty
I
figure.
think $250.
Right. If it is that your visa, and you said this in your comments, if it is that your visa is almost expired, as long as you don't, let's say it expires the 30th of June, you really shouldn't be planning a trip that's gonna take you until the 1st of August. Because clearly you are going to be out of status one way or the other by the 30th of June. So I don't know if that answers the question. But those are the things that you have to consider if it is you're planning to come here.
Okay, great. Thank you. One more thing before we open the floor some more. There was a matter that was being circulated in the papers where it was alleged that a student who is studying in the US committed an offense whilst he's there as a student. how can that criminal matter impact his student visa? So he went to the US as a student, being there, and it's alleged that, I think the allegations were that he took some money from the register where he was working. How can that criminal matter impact his
significantly? Because remember, you're on a student visa. And again, the student visa is one of those that has certain terms and conditions. Certainly, one of the terms and conditions will be that you're not to get into any legal problems, any criminal law legal problems. So if, excuse me, if it is that he goes through the process of facing the offense of whatever they're going to charge him with or have charged him with, and he is found guilty, he may well serve a sentence here in the United States, but at the end of that, they're going to deport him, and that student visa will be unfortunately automatically revoked. Hopefully, it's a scenario where it's a mistake and the situation will resolve in his favor in the courts and he'll be found not guilty. If you're found not guilty, then clearly you go back to as you were. So you should not have an issue. But I can tell you for sure, if he is found guilty of any offense that stems from these allegations, he will be deported back to wherever it is he's from, Jamaica, wherever it is. That's the unfortunate truth.
Okay. Does anyone else on the platform have a question? Anyone else would like to ask a question?
Yes, I would like to ask one. Good afternoon, everyone.
Hi. Afternoon, how are you?
I note where you said you're not advising anyone to overstay there.
Oh no, never, never, never.
Right. So in a case where I'm a citizen in the US and my son's in Jamaica, he comes up for the summer and I decide not to send him back to Jamaica. So he's not going to overstay. Regarding the filing for the adjustment of status, how will that work out? Since it is he's a minor, so he did not make that decision on his own, I made that decision for him. How is it that the USCIS would view his case versus an adult?
Well, obviously, as you said, and you hit the nail on the head, he's a minor, so he couldn't have made a decision for himself. So, and there are lots of cases like that where the USC and their families, because as I always say to people, I tell people what the law is and what will happen or what won't happen, and then them still do what them feel like, and then so in such a case where this happens, we would just have to file the adjustment of status documents and put them into the court, because if you let it stay there and languish because you're saying, oh my goodness, I'm waiting for this to happen, I'm waiting for it to be better in the climate, you run the risk that before you know it, the boy is 18 or 19 and cannot go to college because he has no social, then gets picked up, and so on and so forth. And I'll tell you this because you might have seen it in the news that they're picking up even youngsters. They're picking up even youngsters who have asylum applications pending. So people have to be very, very cautious about what they do now. Very cautious.
I have another question.
Certainly.
If you're filing for a family member, the family member has a visa, and I don't know how much access the government has. I don't know if immigration officers or customs officers have access to that kind of information. It's more than likely not. Am I correct that they don't have access to whether or not someone who's traveling is in the system as
what I always say to people is assume that the government knows everything. And if you assume that the government knows everything, you cannot go wrong.
Okay, so if someone's coming to visit and you've already filed for that person, with what is happening right now, how safe would it be for that person to travel? Because
I have clients who are in the middle of consular processing, and they have come back and forth in the last, what month is this? June? Since this year. So another thing that we don't talk about enough is literally your confidence when you're coming through. Because when you're coming through that airport and they say to you, oh, how long are you staying? You say 2 weeks. What are you going to do? I'm going to see my US citizen wife, my US citizen mother, whatever it is, I'm going to see my people. And they say to you, oh, we see that you are on a petition. Because remember, you most likely or could have actually indicated on your initial documentation that this 260 that you, or 160, whichever it is that you file, you would have completed to get your visitor's visa. You would have said, I have a US citizen relative who's petitioning for me. When you come to the airport, sometimes they'll ask you, anybody putting in documents for you? And you say, yes, who is it? My mother, my father, my husband, my sister, whatever. Oh, so you're planning to stay here? No, sir. I'm going back to my work tomorrow morning or whatever. But once you look as if you are ifing and butting and spelling and guessing, as we say in Jamaica, you might find yourself into problems. So I always advise my clients who are overseas when they're coming on their visitor's visa or whatever it is, when they say to you, oh, you plan to adjust, you say, adjust? I don't know what that means. I am going back to Jamaica. I'm going back to wherever I'm from next week when I am going back to my job. You make that very clear because they have a thing in the law called your intent, which is very important. If you come to that airport and they even discern that, oh, she's not planning to go back home, you have already put yourself in a very negative place. So when you come in, you make sure it is clear to them that you are not here to stay, even though you are on filing, as we would say in Jamaica. You're going back as soon as whatever you're here for is over. That's extremely important.
All right, if I may, someone sent me a question. They're unable to use the mic on the platform. The question is, can they do a session on airport confidence, like how to act at immigration?
Oh, if we can do a session on that, I suppose. The main thing I always tell persons, because I remember about 3 years ago, that's long before this regime came in, under the previous administration, I had maybe 7 or 8 clients who were telling me that they went through a particular airport, and I can call the name of the airport. It was Atlanta. It's a very big, it's huge, that airport. And several persons who had come from Jamaica found themselves back on the next plane. Thankfully, they didn't lock them up. They literally just turned them around. And all of those persons, the US immigration officers at the airport, thought that they were coming here to work, or worse, that they had worked already. And there was actually, for at least one of them, there was actually evidence of conversations in the same way that I related earlier that you and I could have been talking via text about a possible job. It was the same way. And that person's indication to me was, yes, I was talking to so-and-so about a job, but not for now. But you're not going to convince the officer of that. When the officer can look in at your phone and say, you and Courtney talking about all of the only thing left for you to do is sign on the dotted line. So I always say to persons that it starts literally before you get there. So being confident is very useful, but of course, you have to know what you have on your phone. And when you step up to that officer, they may ask you questions that you don't understand, but because you don't want to say you don't understand, because if an officer said to you now, oh, I see your sister is petitioning for you, or your brother is petitioning for you. Oh, you're planning to do adjustment of status here, you know. Yes, sir. You don't know what that means? You say to him, what does that mean? No, man, I am going home next week. That's important because these officers their job is to find out if you are actually planning to stay here. That's their job. Your job is to let them know and to convince them that you're not staying. So that whole demeanor, that whole confidence, the fact that you have a ticket that is not an open ticket, because you're supposed to be working in your country. So why are you here with an open ticket? You have a ticket that's for 2 weeks and you're going to a particular function, you're going to a wedding, you're going to a funeral, whatever it is, and then afterwards you're going back home. So it's important how you present what you present when you get to the airport.
Is there such a thing as being too confident, where immigration will read that in a negative way, meaning that you pull out all your papers, you have answers to every question, to all the questions? Would that be seen in a negative way to say, okay, this is a high reason for suspicion?
Well, one of my favorite footballers ever, Thierry Henry, says there's a thin line between confidence and arrogance. My view is that if you're confident, you're confident. It's not something you're putting on. You're telling them, listen, I am here for time A to B, and at the end, I am going home. I mean, I don't expect you to take out your $1 million and lick them in the face and say, boy, I'm going to need to come a foreign. Obviously not, but at the end of the interaction, the officer should be convinced that Mrs. Flowers, Miss Jones, Mr. Brown is going to be going back home when they're done. So that's your end, as it were, end goal when you're talking to an officer.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Anyone else has a question?
Yes, I have a question. Well, maybe two. You touched on it just a little bit. And the question that I have right now is, you mentioned open ticket. What is it like in the current climate? Because sometimes you're traveling to different destinations and you break up your travel. And say, for example, you buy a one-way ticket to the US. Is there any risk or increased risk in doing that these days?
Oh,
The
yes.
second question, I'll just ask them and you can address them. The second question relates to, you had mentioned the phone and showing them. Do I have to show them my phone, unlock my phone and show them if they ask?
Let's do the last one first. You don't have to show them your phone. You can say to them, listen, send me back on the next plane. One thing that persons must understand is that the visa officer, when you come to the port, meaning most of us come in by air, when you get to Miami or you get to Fort Lauderdale or New York or wherever it is, that visa that is stamped in your passport is not yet your ticket, as it were, into the States. It's getting by that visa officer. So it is not a right that you have based on the visa that is in your passport. When you come and you speak to that visa officer, if he or she is not convinced that, listen, that custom enforcement officer, if he or she is not convinced of your intent, they can turn you around. As it relates to the, so as it relates to your phone, you can say to them, no, I'm not showing you my phone. And then they can say, okay, fine. Well, we'll just send you back home. So it's not that you must show them your phone, but the caveat is you understand that you most likely will be turned around because they're going to say, excuse me, we are defenders of the nation's security. We are the first literal port of entry. We're the keepers. And if we figure that John Brown or Tom Stroke might be a threat, because that's how it's going to be phrased, be a threat to national security, it is our job, it's incumbent upon us to check John Brown out. And part of that means looking at his or her phone when they're coming into the US. But if you say not showing them your phone, you and your phone can go back home. That's not a problem. As it relates to an open ticket, this is not the time for an open ticket, because when you buy a one-way ticket into the US and you're just a visitor, what is that saying? You're coming here and you don't plan for left. I would suggest if you are doing, tri-country trip or whatever it is you're doing, you either have your itinerary or you have where you're going to be picking up your next tickets and so on. But having an open ticket, as it were, not such a good idea. And on the issue of this open ticket, remember too that even though you might have a 10-year visitor's visa, you cannot just come into the States and stay for 6, 7, 8, 9 months. You have to look at the time that they give you. They don't stamp it in your passport anymore, how long you are being given to stay, how long you're being allowed to stay. You have to go on what is called the I-94 website, put your passport number in, and your last name, your first name, and your date of birth, and the country of your passport, and it will tell you June 3 to June 10. So if you stay here until June 11, you are now out of status. That is something that I think people still don't understand. That even if you have a 10-year visitor's visa or a 5-year visitor's visa, you are not allowed to stay longer than the duration of the stay that is on the I-94 website. So as soon as you get a chance, you need to go to that website after you come in and come through customs and check to see how long they give you.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Unless there's any other issue that you'd like Nadine to address. Sure, go ahead.
If it is that I am a green card holder in the States, applied for my citizenship, but I'm pending an interview right now. Back to the minor situation, if it is that my son comes up and I have him overstay and wait until I get my citizenship to do the adjustment of status, is that going to be a strike against my application for citizenship? Since it is an adjustment.
You know, that's a really great question, because on your citizenship application, there's a place there's a question. I wish I could just pull it up now, but there's a question that basically asks if you have ever assisted anyone to breach the immigration law of the United States. Usually when people are thinking about that, they're thinking about dashing somebody across the border, putting somebody in their car trunk. But this scenario that you've painted actually fits it to a T, because that question that says, have you ever helped anyone? That's a broad outline of the question. Have you ever helped anyone to breach the immigration law of the United States? In my humble view, such a situation would fall squarely there. So again, persons have to be extremely cautious and careful in what they do. And remember that a lot of these questions have always been on the application forms. A lot of these things that are being talked about have always been there. It's just that there's not been this level of enforcement. So all I can say as we part is persons must exercise caution, and if possible, persons should seek legal advice before they make certain steps, because it's possible that you can delay certain steps. You wait, you do something else. But as I said before, many persons just do what they want, and then there are problems. So persons have to just think, you have to exercise caution. You must exercise caution. It is never too late to seek some advice. It's never a situation where you're going to say, boy, I'm going to take that advice, but for the next time. Just try and get good advice now, and make sure that you're making good decisions. That's really what I can tell persons now.
And that's a very good note to end on. Thank you so much to everyone for joining in. I think that the participation was really good for this session, and I hope that we can have more sessions at this time when persons are not at work. And of course, as we've said before, if there's any legal issue that you'd like us to specifically address, to speak on, you can always send us an email, and we will, once it's in an area that we practice, of course.
Yes, absolutely.
We will, right, yes, we will seek to address it as best as possible.
All right.
Okay, so thank you all again. and have a wonderful evening.
Absolutely. And just
Thank you, ladies. Have a good night.
what Courtney said, just lawyers are available for persons to speak with. Get good advice, because this is a time where I find that because so much is happening, persons are still unsure. Should I do this? Should I do that? Get some good advice before you make certain decisions. So on that note, have a good night, everybody, and take good care.
Thank you. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.